Hi everyone, it's Raina. So this video is going to look at the astrological chart of Tammy Faye Bakker Mesner. They actually, on Astro Theme, which is where I go to get my time of birth for celebrities, they actually call her Tammy Faye Mesner. I don't mean any disrespect by using Bakker, because even though she divorced Jim Bakker decades ago, that's how she is identified, and people wouldn't maybe know who I was talking about if I didn't say Bakker. So for people who might not remember, Tammy Faye was married to Jim Bakker, and they had the PTL Club, which was a televangelist type of show. And they had some scandals involving Jim Bakker supposedly having an affair with someone, and then paying, an associate paying off the woman with hush money. It was like a church secretary or something like that. And also misappropriation of funds that were donated to the ministry that were used for personal reasons. And they practiced or preached a prosperity gospel at a time when it was kind of like ahead of its time, because later on you see people like Joel Osteen doing the same thing. And it's controversial because people sometimes cast aspersions on mixing church with money, especially when you're trying to solicit donations. But that's like not really where I want to go with this. Although I do want to talk about maybe her attitude towards money, because I do think that there has to be some, looking at that, because that certainly could have been a motivation. One of the things that made Tammy Faye stand out from others, well, first of all, her appearance. I'm hoping, because I haven't looked for any images yet that are royalty free on Wikipedia, that I can find one that really shows her in her heyday with the whole full-on makeup, because that's what she was known for. She wore a lot of makeup, and she had like big hair, and she became like an icon in the gay community. And I really recommend anybody who knows about her or who wants to know about her. There was a documentary that I don't know when it came out, but it was called The Eyes of Tammy Faye, I believe. And they made a musical of it, and it has the same name, so don't get confused with that. But it was a documentary of her life, and I highly recommend it to get like a backstory on her and what she was all about. Because one thing I don't think anyone can deny is that she seemed to have a very sweet personality. There seemed to be an innocence about her. And some people might say, oh, well, that was probably just an act, and, they were grifters and blah, blah, blah. People are going to say things. And I honestly, I don't know why Jim went to prison and she didn't. I think that I think her children were already adults when he got convicted, but maybe they weren't, and maybe that's why, or maybe she wasn't really in on it. I can't really say. But I just want to talk about her basic personality. She had kind of like a loopy personality, where she had like a very kind of a high-pitched voice, and very eccentric, but kind of in an endearing way. And it's funny because I was just, she came into my orbit, just like on YouTube. I don't know why though, because I wasn't even looking at anything associated with that. And it kind of made me think to myself, this would be a good analysis to do, because some of these people, they have this persona that is larger than life on multiple fronts, not only her eccentric personality, but also her appearance. And it doesn't surprise me that her ascendant or rising sign is Sagittarius, because We can look to Elvis, who had this ascendant, and we can look to Elton John, both examples of people who really played up their persona to the hilt. And I'm talking about even like on a visual level. And Tammy Faye looked like she was a very short woman. I don't know her exact height, but she didn't. She was. She wasn't. I was going to say too, like Elvis and Elton both have had weight issues in the past, and Jupiter is about expansion. So when it's on the ascendant, or if somebody has, regardless of what sign is on the ascendant, if they have Jupiter in the first house in conjunction with the ascendant, they may, at least at one time in their life, have weight problems because there's like that sense of largeness. But in her case, she wasn't really, I wouldn't say that she was overweight. She was just kind of, I wouldn't even say chubby, but she had that. I think with her, it was more of a personality thing. She just was very positive. And and another thing I wanted to say about her being a icon of the gay community was that many people, of course, because of especially that Christian fundamentalism, which is what they espoused, it was more of a that's on. I don't know if they had a specific sect that they were part of. She was raised as a Pentecostal fundamentalist Christian, but in any case, whatever you want to call it, it was more in that vein. And homosexuality has been said to be not what they believe in, but she was very positive about the gay community during the AIDS crisis. And so also because of her appearance, she did look a bit like a drag queen, and I don't say that in a insulting way, but that's why she had a connection to that community. And that's also Sagittarius rising, because the excess. So you have Elvis with his sequin jumpsuits, and Elton with his platform shoes and outrageous costumes, and Tammy Faye Bakker with her appearance and even her mannerisms. But that goes to other things too. So let's talk about her personality or persona. Let's talk about the material side of things and religion, and even maybe how her relationships may have, been, both of her husbands went to prison for financial mishandlings. What does that have to do with anything? Well, first of all, Tammy Faye was a sun in Pisces, and her moon was in Scorpio. So because she was a sun in Pisces and her ascendant was in Sag and close enough in degrees, it formed a square. When somebody has a square between their sun and ascendant, and you could even say like an opposition, because those are both hard angles, they will tend to have an issue with how they present themselves and how they really are. And with the square, it can be frustrating. So she may have not understood why she was treated a certain way or regarded a certain way, and how she really felt about herself. This happens sometimes when people, for instance, dress a certain way and they get treated that way and they don't understand because they're a different way. And then they feel like they're being misunderstood. Her moon sign of Scorpio is very interesting because she also had the moon in the 10th house, which is the house of public reputation. So what's interesting about that is that Scorpio is ruled by Mars, but also Pluto. And Pluto can be, in particular, I feel this influence of the secrets, um, what's really going on beneath the surface. And the moon in astrology can symbolize fluctuation. So if somebody has the moon in the 10th house, their reputation can fluctuate. So maybe at one time they're very popular, and another time, like if they have a scandal. So I can associate Pluto with scandal, or Scorpio with scandal, therefore, because something is happening beneath the surface. But the moon can also represent the creativity. And she and Jim, before they had the PTL club, they had a puppet show that was a Christian ministry. They had some other children's show, I think, as well. And so, and they're, you could say whatever they were doing, it was in the communication field that it was creative. And that can indicate a career that is creative. But also, the moon represents the intuitive and therefore the spiritual. So a career with something spiritual. And one of the things about evangelicals is that they are the Christian version of what I would say like the Bhakti yogis in Hinduism, where they preach a love of Jesus, and that's why they want to share his word, and they are devotional. And, of course, gospel music, because she was a singer too. It has that quality of adoration for God. And there's like the emotion that is attached to it. So I feel that is part of it as well. One thing that I believe about her, because she had Mercury in Aquarius, Venus in Aquarius. Of course, Aquarius is very quirky, but Aquarius and water signs, and even Sagittarius as their ascendant, are all psychic, prophetic signs, or intuitive, at the very least. So these kinds of people will tend to gravitate towards religious, spiritual, or creative types of careers. And with Libra at the midheaven, and Libra is ruled by Venus, and Sagittarius at the ascendant, yes, I could see like show business. Yeah, I know we're talking about, these TV shows that are religious themed, but it still is entertainment at some level, because there's music and there's, things like that. So I do feel that when somebody has Sagittarius rising, that they may be a showman or a showwoman, and definitely have that extroverted side to themselves, because water signs like Pisces and Scorpio aren't necessarily outgoing. I'm not talking about somebody that is afraid of talking to someone, like social anxiety, but these are feminine signs. The water signs are feminine, and they tend to be more internal, or selective in who they allow into their inner circle. We could extend that to the earth signs, which are also feminine signs. But the water signs, I really see that way because of their emotional nature. But their emotional nature may be much more limited in who they tend to be much more partial to certain people, I would say. So having Sagittarius rising is very good for somebody who's a Pisces. But, I do believe that Pisces people are chameleons. They're mutable water signs. So I feel like they can take on the attributes of any sign if need be, and be very adaptable. But on the other hand, you could almost say that it's almost like the person who's a changeling who goes into different personalities, multiple personalities or something. And it's like, who is the real self? If they're trying to, because Neptune is a ruler of Pisces, and that can indicate someone who is, in some cases, if it's afflicted, the the important inner planets in Pisces, they could have trouble discerning between reality and fiction. Her Neptune is very well aspected. She did have a hard angle she had a square from Neptune to the ascendant. And that means that, she may have had what we would call like identity issues, because the ascendant to me isn't like the true identity, but just like how the person is even viewing themselves. I mean, the ascendant is the cusp of the first house of the self. So to some degree, we would look at it as the self in this lifetime, but ultimately the sun is going to represent that. Now, I think what's interesting is when the moon is in Scorpio, I feel like this is the most difficult moon sign to have, because the moon representing the emotions and what Scorpio is all about, it makes the emotions a very difficult thing to contend with. And it's interesting because out of all my videos thus far, up until the time of this recording, I think the one video that has the most hits is my Moon in Scorpio video. And I actually redid that video because some people cried foul and they thought that I was being too negative. And so I relented and I redid it. But as somebody who has the moon in conjunction with Pluto, that's kind of like a similar thing. But it's a little bit different because then you have to look at the moon. You have to look at the sign of the conjunction, and that will temper it somewhat. But just talking about the moon in Scorpio itself, this can be all of the shadow emotions that the person feels so deeply. But depending on their sun sign, and her sun and her moon formed a trine, but because of the nature of Scorpio, I feel that that can still be incredibly difficult when your sun sign is in Pisces, because Pisces is a sign that is very self-sacrificing and there's an innocence about Pisces, but there can be victimization. Now, we don't always know, based on people's past, what they endured, even if they write an autobiography. And I guess she wrote a few books on her life. I haven't read them, so I don't know if she divulged any information. Her 8th house, that is Scorpio's domain, suggests that she may have endured some things that maybe she didn't share with the public, and she has every right to keep those things to herself. But those can certainly affect how she experienced life. I do feel that people who have sun, moon, or ascendant in Pisces may have suffered victimization. Everybody can suffer trauma, victimization. But what I mean is that for their particular psychological or emotional makeup, that could have impacted them more than the average person and led to them, seeing life in a different way and doing life in a different way. And one of the big ways that this transpires for Pisces is that they may internalize their role as a victim, because this is a sun sign. This becomes all pervasive. Like, I'm here to not to not honor my own wishes, but to sacrifice myself for everyone around me. I'm not here to express my unpleasant feelings that may have actually been caused by another person. I'm here to suppress them because I'm a people pleaser. I want other people to be happy, and I don't want to, if I make them upset, then I feel like I failed, or I feel like I'm a bad person. And the problem is that can lead to martyrdom. And when Jim went to prison, she stuck by him for several years, and then she ended up marrying one of their associates, their business associates. And I'm sure a lot of people judged her for that and thought that that was really cold for her, because she was married to Jim for many years. But the thing is, she made a statement that she had been unhappy for many years. So it just goes to show that people can stay with somebody even if they're unhappy. That's what we talk about when we talk about sacrifice. And I'm not saying that in 100% of those cases that's wrong, but I don't really like the word sacrifice. I think that if somebody is doing something for the sake of somebody else, then that should make them feel good as well. If it depletes you when you're doing something for somebody else rather than for yourself, then it probably is toxic to you, and it's not going to be good for that other person because it's not coming from a good place. So I feel like this was probably something where, not only her moon in Scorpio, but her 8th house, she had Chiron and Pluto here, and they were in conjunction. So that is pretty intense. And she also had the North Node here. And I want to say that the 8th house is the house of transformation. It's like the phoenix rising from the ashes. So it's not to say that somebody has hard, malefic planets or hard angles to the 8th house, that means that, oh, wow, you're doomed or anything like that. No, it's to suggest that you might have a cross to bear, but you can transform yourself and heal others if you have Chiron there with that. So that's really great. Mercury's communication, and she had in an Aquarius. So yeah, I mean, this is like that delightfully loopy kind of quality that there's a sparkling quality. Aquarius is considered electric, or, the Uranus, the Uranian energy. And it means like it's like one of a kind, or it means that the person may say things that are unpredictable. And that makes for a great speaker, like especially if you're a host, a TV host. And she did do a talk show with some other guy that wasn't religious in nature, I don't believe. I believe it was in the late 90s. And I remember watching it. So, yeah. Now, her Mercury and Venus were both in Aquarius. And Venus can be, I think, even like the thing that, first of all, Venus can be the person's view towards love. So there is like kind of so that might be why she was open to homosexuality, because it's interesting. Uranus, the ruler of Aquarius, is connected in the tarot. The Fool card is connected to Uranus. And I remember looking at it, and they said bisexuality or maybe even homosexuality. And what they said is that it is this nonconformity. And that's what it represented. So we could say that in general, but because Venus is who you love, and it's in Aquarius, I could see why she would be open, because, Aquarius is very progressive. So it's going to be open to people loving people, in a various way, not in this very rigid sort of heterosexual man-woman kind of way. So that makes a lot of sense that she would have been progressive in that particular area. And I think also it probably lends charm. And so people saw that quirky aspect of her, and they found it very charming. And it's interesting to me that both her Mercury and Venus in Aquarius in the second house, you could say that Venus rules the second house in astrology. So when people have Venus in their second house altogether, they tend to be materialistic. And I don't mean that in like, oh, wow, they're just greedy. I just mean that they love luxury. They just do. And they take pleasure in it. Venus is about pleasure. They take pleasure. And it's kind of interesting, because if somebody truly takes pleasure in something, in the material things, to me, that's like a very, organic form of materialism, because they're actually finding enjoyment in it. They're not just doing it because they want to impress people. They want to seem better than other people. They actually are enjoying it. And Venus represents that. So I feel like it's organic. But it's definitely interesting and noteworthy that you're talking about somebody who was in a ministry who has this placement, because we can see how that went and why that went. But preaching the prosperity gospel, Mercury in the second house. And the fact that Mercury is in Aquarius rules the 11th house. Aquarius is ruled by Uranus, and Uranus is technology. So televangelism, for spreading the prosperity gospel. I also think that people with Mercury in the second house tend to be shrewd business people. They tend to have good ideas for business, and they tend to have a head for numbers and all of that stuff. They just tend to be very good with that. If she hadn't been doing that, who knows? Maybe she would have been an accountant. But I don't think she would have, because she has other things that suggest more of a creative type of outlet. Her Mars was in Gemini, 0 degrees. So that means it was on the cusp with Taurus. Taurus is the ruler of the second house in astrology, fixed earth, ruled by Venus, all about the money, all about the Benjamins. So she was on the cusp with that, but she was Gemini, Mars in Gemini. This is somebody who loves or I shouldn't say loves, has a sense of urgency about communication, is driven to communicate. Thank God that she found that outlet, because it would have had to go somewhere. And she has her Mars in the 5th house, and they say wherever your Mars is, that's where the person's that's where they're pouring their energy into. And the 5th house is in part creativity. So certainly, and it's also children, by the way, and they did have a couple of children's shows. So not only did they combine children and creativity. But just kind of like, being very driven by wanting to be creative, for sure, and driven to want to communicate. And not surprisingly, her sun was in the 3rd house, which is Gemini's domain. So there was something about her essence that wanted to be that media type of person. If she were alive today, there's no doubt in my mind that she would have a YouTube channel. Even if she, couldn't find a TV outlet. And she probably would prefer to do something on YouTube, because there's more of a populist perspective with YouTube, where it's not just about this top down thing where I'm up here and I'm this movie star or this television star, and I'm going to like have fans. It's like the fans can converse with the star, if you want to call it a star. And I have Venus in Aquarius, just like Tammy Faye, and that's why I love YouTube so much. Is that it's more egalitarian. It's not like the person who's the content creator is elevated that much, but you can still kind of, I mean, I certainly get that rush, if I comment to somebody who has a following and they respond to me and I'm like, oh, they responded to me, they gave me a thumbs up or they gave me a heart, it's kind of fun. You can play with that, and it's not like as it's not as like remote as it used to be. And I think that that's a healthy thing, but you can still play with that because that's just part of, I think that, that's built into us to, or you could even say conditioned into us to worship something outside of ourselves, instead of like, even with God, instead of like knowing that God is within us and it's not something externalized, but, we can still have that externalize God too, and that gives us that kind of way of separating ourselves as a soul from the collective soul, So I think that's fine. So yeah, so she definitely had that creative urge to communicate, and looking at that fifth house, because the fifth house is love. She doesn't have any planets in the seventh house of committed partnership, but she does have or the vast majority of, she has a little bit of Gemini, but the vast majority of Cancer was in that seventh. So that makes for a very devoted partner. But in her fifth house of love, which it can be anybody's view of love, attitude towards love, she had Mars, Uranus, and Saturn. Interesting. Saturn suggests that she might have been a bit of a workaholic, and she might not have been somebody who was like really that interested in doing, extracurricular things or hobbies. She might have just been all about business. And maybe that's why they were so successful, is that they were both very hardworking and, built up their businesses and, didn't, maybe they considered things that were fun to be frivolous. And that's kind of like, I think sometimes that's a church mentality too, where it's like, oh, that's not really, that's part of the world or something like that. Because the fifth house can be amusements, pastimes, hobbies, things you do for downtime, or even pleasure itself. Now, that would suggest somebody who is very austere, but I doubt that she was that much. Interestingly, she had Mars in the fifth house. Now, Mars can be the sex drive, by the way, and the libido, and the fifth house can be recreational sex. So that might be, no matter who she was with. And they said on Wikipedia that she could be quite flirtatious with her husband on air, even though they were doing a Christian ministry. And she could even bring up sexual topics. So it seems to me that she may have had a very also progressive attitude towards sex. And certainly she had Taurus, her like I said, her Mars was 0 degrees of Gemini, so that's like on the cusp of Taurus. And Taurus is a very lusty kind of an energy itself. And she had Uranus here, and Uranus is the ruler of Aquarius. So again, this emphasizes I have this as well. It emphasizes this idea of not like being that attached to, um, love in a monogamous kind of a way. Now, this is not the house of commitment, so it's hard to really explain it that way. I would say like somebody who might even believe in free love. Maybe had she been born into a different family that were not preachers or something of that nature, maybe she would have believed in an open marriage, or more of like free love, because yeah, I don't want to confuse that with the seventh house. But definitely having her own views on love that might have been more detached and less kind of like, because her moon in Scorpio, that suggests a bit of I don't know if I would say jealousy in love, but certainly, maybe fear, maybe possessiveness. I hesitate to say that because that's really associated with Taurus. But Scorpio is a sign that is very intense about its feelings, and that would include love, and that would include, what is love? Well, love is body, mind, and soul. It's not, there's no gray there. So she was probably the kind of person, she either was really into somebody or she really wasn't. And maybe she was really not more times than she was. I don't know. In her sixth house, she had Jupiter, and it was in Gemini. Jupiter can indicate, even though Jupiter's not a personal planet, it's also not an outer planet per se. I mean, it's definitely not a generational planet, but it's not really totally outer. I mean, it's kind of in between. It has a year-long transit, 13-month transit sometimes. And, so it can be more on the level of, it can still like affect us. And I read this book that was just about your Jupiter sign. And I believe it had like a Vedic astrology type of a slant. And I believe that, and I don't know this to be true, that maybe in Vedic astrology, your Jupiter sign is very important because Jupiter is the largest planet, so it exerts this great influence on you. Well, it's so weird because I was saying these other things I have in common with Tammy, Faye, and I also have Jupiter in Gemini. So just like interpreted, we could say that Jupiter in Gemini, it's very lucky. A person can find expansion in life and luck through communication of any kind. So the writer, the speaker, the media personality, and having the sun there, that would be the personality, the media personality. I'm talking about the sun in the third. But seeing that she has Jupiter, because that's when you have the sun in the third house, regardless of what your sun sign is, that's going to be a sub-influence of the sun in Gemini. And so chances are you're going to be more interested in teaching, in learning, in communicating, regardless of what your sun sign or your Mercury sign is. So Jupiter in the sixth house means that there might have been some lucky breaks along the way, work-wise, with her that allowed them to advance the way that they did. And just like if anybody has Jupiter in the sixth house, they may just, a big one is religious themed work. That's a big one. I was going to say too that they may never have to worry about having work. You know how some people, it's like, even if they're in between jobs, somebody calls them like a buddy and says, hey, are you available? and they always seem to have work. That to me is like Jupiter and Gemini. It might not be the thing they want to do for the rest of their life, but they always can pay the bills because they're always like work never leaves them, that kind of thing. Okay, now let's look at that 8th house, because that is Scorpio's domain, and that's where it tends to get a little hairy. So she had Chiron and Pluto. They were in Leo. And they were in the 8th house. Okay. Now, I'm just going to be very blunt about this, but I want to make it clear that this is by no means necessarily true for her, because I don't know her life story, and it's also not true for anybody listening to this if you happen to have this yourself or if you know somebody else's chart. Doesn't mean that this is true. But one of the first things that I think about is sexual abuse. I do with both of these placements because, first of all, because this is one of the sexual houses, but it's one of those tricky houses. Somebody told me, probably somebody that listened to one of my videos said to me that the 8th house is sex magic, and that you could say like tantric yoga or something like that. But the 5th house is like sex for pleasurable reasons. Or, the 5th house, by the way, is the house of procreation. So I don't really like that those two realities are coinciding in that 5th house, because to me, you don't, sex for pleasure and procreation, it would be nice if they go together, but a lot of times they don't, and then you end up with accidental pregnancies. But nothing is really an accident, in my opinion, anyhow. But anyway, getting back to the 8th, because of the nature of the 8th house, because it tends to be the taboo, and so there's like shame. It's a shame-bound house. That's why it's connected to the shadow. It's all these things that the person, it's subconscious mind, which is like the person knows. They may know exactly what happened to them, but they are trying to live their life regardless. And they're not, sometimes they might not be aware of how much they're being affected by it. So how can that play out? Well, and then Pluto here can actually be brutalization, might be a rape. It might be continuous. Pluto can be trauma. And, I noticed Tammy Faye had a very nervous quality about her. I felt like she spoke in a very kind of staccato speaking style, kind of like, almost like hysterical to me. Like her voice was high pitched, but there was something about her mannerisms that seemed a little bit on edge. So maybe this is where that comes from, but it was suppressed. And like I said, she has the moon in Scorpio. People with the moon in Scorpio can experience this as well, can experience those themes. Actually, a lot of these things in the chart, if you have things in your houses or in your personal points, they can be interchangeable to some degree, and you can see the same themes emerge. There might be like slight variations in how they present, but they can be very similar. So Pluto is power. The 8th house, and it can be money, other people's money though. Ha. Well, what are we talking about here? The donations from the public. That's other people's money. Chiron, woundedness. And the 8th, the 2nd house and the 8th houses, they oppose one another. Okay? So let's see here. She actually had I'm trying to see if she had any oppositions here from those planets. I don't believe that she did. She did with Chiron. Okay. Wow. This is very interesting. I see here that she has an opposition between Venus and Pluto. Okay, now that is, yeah, coming from the second house. Okay. Now here's the thing. This is very, very important because I have done a video. I've done actually video on the hard angles, like the square in opposition from Venus to Pluto. You can find that on my channel. I'll try to link it if I remember. Also, I did a video on, I believe I did a video on transactional relationships where I cover this as well, because this is an example of that. A transactional relationship is one where, it's where people, they're interacting with the other person because each one has something the other one wants. Usually how this ends up is a male-female relationship where traditionally it has been the man who has the money and the woman has her looks and sexuality. And even in marriage, you can have these types of relationships. The classic one is the Hollywood relationship, the May-December romance or marriage, where the older man, he's looking to, maybe he was a movie star who's kind of like fading and he's looking to seem virile. And so he wants that arm candy to prove he still has it. It's like a macho thing, an ego thing. The woman is looking for the open wallet. Now, I think, those kind of relationships are sad, on some level. But on some level, I have no problem with it if each person knows exactly what they're getting into, because you could almost call it like a business arrangement or whatever. The problem is when a person finds themselves in that relationship and then they realize that love was much more important than they thought it was. And I think that happens so many times. It doesn't happen all the time, which to me is kind of unfortunate, because that means that person has probably closed off their emotions, like the person who is allowing themselves to be used financially, or sexually, I guess you could say too, is like, it's just all about the ego and materialism and not about the love. So I guess in that sense you could say it's sad, but I don't really like get all worked up about it. Some people are like, she's a gold digger, da da da. It's like, if I don't see why people get so riled up about it, then don't have that type of relationship if you don't want one. But it's because the reason people do that is because they probably are afraid that someone doesn't really love them and they're there for the wrong reasons. So anyway, she has this opposition. And what I was saying about the eighth house is that when I used the example in the video I did about the hard angles from Venus to Pluto, is that if a woman is sexually abused, and I believe I found this out with Tracy Lords, who became a porn star, an underage porn star, before she ended up doing, mainstream movies and TV. But she created that notoriety because she was underage when it became exposed, and then all her movies supposedly got destroyed, and all of that. That was when they had VCRs and videotapes in the 80s. But I did her chart, and I have her. I have to look that up because I don't think I added it to my playlist. But I believe she had that hard angle from Venus to Pluto, but I'm not quite sure. She had other things going on that definitely spoke to that type of situation that she found herself in. But she had been sexually abused from a young age, and what happened was she got tricked into pornography because she thought she was just going to model, and then they asked her to take off her clothes, which I'm sure is a very common ploy that was used in those magazine ads or those newspaper ads to get women to do it. And, if a woman is desperate for money and she was in a bad home situation, it almost seemed like it was destined to happen. Let's put it that way. So in her case, it was like this thing like, okay, this seems to be my lot in life, that I am being exploited sexually. So I might as well make money from it. And by the way, Tracy Lords is a Taurus. Okay. So a person who has this opposition from the second to the eighth house could very well think like this and could very well become a sex worker of some sort, or somebody who is not going to do that. They could enter into a relationship where it just is natural that they seek out a mate who has money, and maybe they look at it as, well, I'm giving of my body and that person's going to give their money. Or in some cases, it might be that the person does end up going into sex work. I'm not saying for the rest of their life, but maybe for some point. And, that's another story for another day, but I just don't understand why people get so freaked out about sex work, because if that's something, I mean, it could be very dangerous. I agree. But if it's something that someone doesn't want to do, you don't have to do it. I just don't see why people judge other people so harshly for it. But in any case, I find this very interesting. So let me say one more thing, and this is with the Chiron, the wounding of Chiron, and also being in Leo, which is a sign of pride, is that for people that come from fundamentalist indoctrination, or I'm not against Baptists and Pentecostals in general. This is not putting any particular sect down. But what I'm saying is that there is a lot of shaming, intended or not, that does occur, because there is this idea of like, what is God's plan for us, and how are we supposed to put that, and you're supposed to save yourself from marriage. Well, what happens if you get raped before you get married? Did you do something wrong? What if it was date rape and it was what if it was even a little bit fuzzy? What if you got drunk and your date took advantage of you, but you didn't say no? All of these things can prey on somebody's mind. They can feel guilty about it. They can feel shame-bound. And they can feel that they're not worthy of God. Leo is about dignity. And there's a wounding with dignity as it pertains to Chiron in Leo. And in the eighth house, it could have one of these kinds of taboo, secretive things that happened. And that could have, shaped that person's life in a profound way, but also it can lead to the person transcending it, the phoenix rising from the ashes. And this house is a house of spirituality for sure, but it's more of the shamanic version, which is alchemic, meaning that it's individual to that person. So that person is somebody who has their own path, even within that organized religion path that I associate more with the ninth house, and that they can transform themselves, and they probably have an innate knowledge that they can transform themselves. I also think it's very interesting that her north node is here, and it's in Virgo, which is the ruler of the sixth house in astrology. This indicates Virgo is a symbol of chasteness or purity. So what it is, or what her soul's mission, if she did get violated, as we call it, is to see her purity within that violation and to know that she still had that and that other people have that no matter what shame that they experienced. Who knows? Maybe, these taboo subjects, like, I think about somebody like Mackenzie Phillips, who is a sun in Scorpio. I did her chart. I don't know about her eighth house, but I know her sun, who came out that she had committed incest with her father. And I shouldn't say she committed it like she really, she was really out of it, but I mean, as an adult. And that situation, how that, really affected her. Is there a more taboo subject than that? Probably not. So, but she's a Scorpio, so that was part of her healing process. So who knows, Tammy Faye, if any of those kinds of skeletons were in her closet, of a sexual nature in particular, later on she may have divulged that because this atmosphere these days is a lot more accepting of those things. Because our planet is ascending and we are becoming higher versions of ourselves. And so all of that judgment, all of those things have to go. They're not, those are part of the lower nature. And actually, they have been used against us in spiritual warfare and or actually, you could say psychic warfare. So I find that very interesting as well. And there was something about her soul mission was to resurrect herself. Isn't that funny? We talk about Jesus's resurrection. I'm recording this on Good Friday, right before Easter. And so Tammy Faye might have needed to do that for herself. Like the phoenix rising from the ashes. Like, you're never persona non grata. You're never like a non-entity because of some scandal that emerged. In her ninth house, she had Neptune, which is very interesting. If somebody has Neptune in the ninth house, this can indicate that they even have visions. Now, of course, she's a Pisces, Scorpio moon. Neptune is, I feel like, very supernatural. The ruler of the 12th house, even can deal with past lives. And this can be the person who develops that relationship with Jesus. It's not just theoretical, intellectual. It's, really talking to Jesus. Some people have this with archangels. Some people have this with Mother Mary, or maybe some Hindu deity, whatever. And so that can be very devout because it is coming from this. It's like maybe even having vision. So it takes it to the next level. You can go to church every Sunday, but that doesn't mean you're having that like really transcendent experience. So that could indicate somebody who is a true believer. But it can also be deception. And this can be somebody who is vulnerable to cults, because Neptune is the ruler of her sun sign, and that can be the person who is susceptible to a guru or some kind of a charismatic figure who kind of pulls the wool over their eyes. Because it can be like being gullible with religion, being, blindly led, not questioning, just like trusting. But you're trusting, who are you trusting? Are you trusting the right person? Is the philosophy, the ninth house is philosophy, credo. Um, but your religious credo too, your religious beliefs. But with Neptune, they can be diluted beliefs. And, Pisces can be a diluted sign because there's always that tendency there's always that urge to escape. Neptune is associated with drugs. And drugs are meant to escape the harshness of this world that we look at as so cold, so cruel. So, Pisces people are sensitive souls. So, I think Karl Marx said that religion is the opiate of the masses. Is that true or is that false? It can be true. I mean, obviously, he was coming from an atheistic viewpoint. So, of course, he's going to be derisive about it. But was he lying, or, was he false in that statement? Not 100% of the time. It's how we interact with spirituality or religion. Some people are doing it to escape their reality, and they're not being responsible in their lives, and they want to just think that everything is like peaches and cream, and they're not dealing with practical matters. We're in the physical world, right? So we can't totally divorce ourselves from it. But on the other hand, they're the people who are totally immersed in the physical. Those people are deluded, in my opinion, because they think that all we are is bags of bones, and that material objects are everything when they're temporary. So there has to be kind of like that interaction with the two, and what we would call integration is the word I was looking for. So so I think she was the real deal in terms of her religious beliefs. I don't think that she was just like a grifter looking, to pull the wool over other people's eyes. But I do think it's interesting because there was some deception connected with religion that was a part of her life. Whether she was participating in it actively, knowingly, I don't necessarily think so, but it was still connected to her. In the 10th house, I've already talked about the moon there. Sometimes the moon, it's interesting. I kind of discarded this to even mention, but now thinking about her gay following, the moon can indicate that a person has a following with others, because this is the top of the chart. So it can be like I feel like this can be like your fame, but it's like with the feminine energy. So males can have a lot of feminine energy, some more than others. So even though, they might have been gay males, it still she had that connection with them on that level, and they saw her as this icon because of her persona. So that is interesting as well. And it's like kind of like, I think, more than the sun being in the 10th, because the sun being in the 10th, I always thought that was fame, but that can be more like the leader. But the moon could be more of the celebrity in a sense, because it elicits emotion in the public, from the public. And that's what you have to have when somebody likes you or loves you, or feels that emotional connection with you. Okay, well, I think I'm going to leave it there. I don't know if I've ever done an analysis that went over an hour, and it didn't even seem like it went that. I just was so fascinated by doing her chart, and I'm glad that I did. And I hope that, if there's anybody who stayed, you really deserve a gold star. But I hope that you enjoyed this, and if you'd like a private reading, please click on the link below to see all of my offerings. Thanks for listening. Take care. Bye.